So at the end of June, both myself and Amy took part in a buddy read along with Tandem Collective UK for the Midnight Feast, by Lucy Foley. And a lot of our opinions were very similar when it came to, our end of read thoughts. Whilst we found this to be enjoyable overall, it did start quite slow. It definitely wasn't a kind of book we were rushing back to. Obviously, we had set daily chapters and we were happy to read those because obviously we were curious to find out, what was going on, how things would unfold. But we found that we were able to just put it back down until the next day. There was no this real urgency to get to the final pages. Obviously, this could be due to the fact that it was a set reading schedule, so, takes away some of that momentum, or it was just the pacing of the book itself. I have to say, one thing I did really appreciate about this was the short, punchy chapters. There were no 20+ page chapters. Thank you so much. It was also told through multiple points of view. Now, both of us do prefer dual, but Amy found that this worked really well for her. It allowed for this fuller view of how all the character stories intertwined. But for me, it was still a little bit of a jumble. There were, switches between past and present timelines. You had excerpts from a character's childhood journal. There was just a lot to keep up with. And I am not one to take note of a chapter heading more often than not. So I did find myself flipping back to check who I was reading at which point. Something we both picked up on, and turns out a lot of others did as well, was that one of the storylines in this was that the characters knew each other as older teens, but failed to recognise each other as adults. Now, had they been, childhood acquaintances, then fair enough. But as teenagers, this unrecognising of each other, it wasn't as plausible as you'd think. However, the birds. We're still not entirely sure what purpose they served. The folkloric element, it added atmosphere, but not substance. And we felt that the whole thing with the birds just didn't really seem to impact the story in a meaningful way. And potentially probably could have been left out without changing too much of the overall story. Amy loves a good thriller and usually has quite a decent track record at spotting twists. And she did have her suspicions at some points, but the big twist at the end still managed to catch her off guard. So well done, Lucy. We both felt that this was a steady 3-star read for most of the book. However, for Amy, the ending did earn itself an extra star. Overall, we wanted to love The Midnight Feast more than we did. It did start slow and it did pick up towards the end. And don't get me wrong, it did keep us intrigued enough to keep going. But in the end, it was just that.